call from Satish Boolell 1 week after my husband and I landed in Mauritius after 2 years in Seychelles. I came back exhausted, overworked, if you'll believe it, and very much determined not to engage into any professional activity for at least a few months. But when Satish called to ask me if I would like to proofread his book, I said, but yes, of course, send it now. And it didn't occur to me at that time that I was actually saying yes to work because, well, it wasn't work. It was the chance to get to know things that I've always wanted to know about Satish. I don't know about you, but I have always been very intrigued by Satish Boolell's work. And I remember many a cocktail party when I asked him whether I could attend one of his postmortems. I think he said yes, but I'm not too sure he actually meant it. But I always chickened out. I mean, I don't think I'd have the stomach for it. But that's not what intrigued me with Satish Boolell's work. It was this knowledge that he had acquired. During the course of his 30-odd years as a forensic doctor, Satish has been privy to so many things that we in the press or the public have absolutely no inkling of. He saw a different side of the country, of society, of people, of the system that we think we know. And when I say we, I mean people like me and people like many of you here who have some knowledge of current affairs, of what happens behind closed doors, people who know how the police work, how unfair the judicial system can be, how monstrous people can sometimes be. And yet I realized after I finished reading the book how little I actually knew. And I couldn't decide how to react to my newfound knowledge. And I'm betting you will be facing the same dilemma. Satish's book made me angry. It made me cry. Some chapters broke my heart, while others made me laugh out loud. But above all, it made me think. It made me think how broken we are. It made me understand something precious, that we really cannot judge by our own standards, that everybody is bearing his or her own cross, and also that some things just simply cannot be explained. I learned, however, that it is possible to solve most, if not all, of the crimes, if only those whose duty it is to do just that know how to do their jobs. As I did, so will you understand things, I mean, especially how our criminal justice system works and why basically sometimes it just doesn't. And you will find that it's disturbing, and this is a big understatement. This is why Satish Boolell's work is important. He has written an important book. He has had the courage to write a very useful book. And it's not about voyeurisme. In fact, the author's restraint is really quite admirable. He doesn't name most of the people he talks about, but I think many of the people will recognize themselves. And he explains in his foreword why he chooses to name some of the people he does talk about, but I'll let you find this out for yourselves. But I urge you, especially young journalists out there who write about so-called faits divers, sometimes without understanding what they're talking about, I urge you to read the book. If nothing else, it will teach you compassion. But I will not spoil your fun, and I will not give too much away. But someone who did give something of himself away is the author himself. Where is Satish? There he is. Forensics in Paradise is not an autobiography, but you definitely understand the man better. You understand le pourquoi of the sarcasm, the presence, the omnipresence of the sense of humor. And it makes you wonder, it really does, how did he go through all of this and yet retain what to me defines him best, his decency? How did you do it, Satish? Well, maybe I suppose this is the subject of another book, and maybe I will write it, and maybe you will proofread it. Thank you for your attention. I now have the immense pleasure of calling upon Mr. Gavin Glover to officially launch the book. Mr. Glover.
It is a great honor to have been asked to participate in the launching of this book written by Dr Satish Boolell, a true Mauritian who wears, as they say, his purple heart on his sleeve. When I was sent an early copy a couple of weeks ago, I spent some time thinking about the title. It smacked of the laconic irony which usually laces any conversation with Satish. I was not wrong. The book is written in plain, simple language to which has been liberally added local additives to make up a most enjoyable read. Satish and I came to know each other in 1985 when I was a freshman in our district courts, and he was a chief forensics pathologist of the Mauritius police force. From then on we crossed swords many a time, and I soon found out that there was little to be gained trying to poke questions at an expert witness who obviously knew his stuff. Our exchanges were tinted with good humor, and I was glad to read that he remembered the day I was cross-examining him at the intermediate court on his opinion as to whether my client was sane enough to stand trial. And I jokingly alluded to the fact that she should probably need to visit the psychiatric ward of the hospital, given the opinion he was emitting. At the time, there was no possibility of obtaining any expert to contradict the police expert on forensics. Now, fortunately, things have changed, and Satish is more and more an expert for the defense than for the police. The mere fact that he is available to be called as an expert for the defense brings a new balance to the system as we have recently experienced. In fact, since he retired from the police, I have called upon Satish as an expert witness in two high-profile cases, two high-profile murder cases. And in both cases, I'm glad to report that we succeeded in our endeavors to see to it that justice prevailed. As aptly put by the author himself in the book, truth always prevails. This collection of true stories is a real eye-opener on the otherwise uncharted territory of forensics in criminal cases in Mauritius. The insight given by the exquisite narrative of the author is enlightening, both scientifically and informatively. We are thus treated to a rare peek into behind-the-scenes stories which are told with the humane touch characteristic of the author. Having practiced criminal law for more than 30 years now, I have, in this book, learned quite a few things about cases in which I was personally involved as counsel. You see, during police inquiries, normally matters that pertain to the inquiry should not be made public by the protagonists involved, be it the lawyer, the pathologist, or the police for that matter. You will, however, now come to know in this book how information is leaked to the press and make your own opinion on our local adepts of the leaky Mr. Snowden. Today the cases referred to are over, so there is obviously no impediment to the facts elicited being published. This odyssey starts with a preamble in which we are forewarned that the author's aim is to provide a bird's-eye view of crime in the tropics, a tall order, if any, by anyone's standards. Inspired by his personal experience as a practicing pathologist for over 3 decades, the author's natural charisma oozes betwixt the print and makes the book one which will leave no reader without reaction. And trust me, this is beyond reasonable doubt. As I sped through the various chapters, I was, as you will surely be, surprised to see how far-reaching the net had been cast by the author. From the basic identification processes available to the pathologist, we jumped to the immensely sad case of young Concita Jolita. I was extremely moved by the tale of this child of poverty. But the most important part in this chapter was the call to better the system and come up with a protocol for the examination of child victims of sexual assaults. The suggestion made that this identified protocol would be named Concita's Protocol in memory of the poor soul is a brilliant idea if there was one. This is not the only recommendation made. A number of these recommendations pervade the book and bear testimony to the ideals of Satish. His insatiable hunger for truth, justice, and for fundamental, far-reaching changes in the system he dealt with is laid bare for all to see. The book then rolls on, and the reader is gripped by the true stories of child abuse, sexual assaults, cold cases, and the greatly enjoyable pearls of medico-legal practice. The titles of the various chapters are sometimes baffling. Two examples come readily to mind. The one called Candle in the Oven, or the one Blowing Knickers in the Wind. But all along, the thread laid by the author keeps the reader avidly reading on to get to the next chapter and the incredible stories of human tragedy. But let me reassure you, all is not gore and drama, because there are, sprinkled at the right places, brighter stars, episodes that illuminate the narration. These are moments of great hilarity. I have selected a couple of passages in order to exemplify what I say. Bear with me. Chapter 9 of the book is entitled Sexual Assaults, Bollywood Revisited. And the first subtitle of this chapter is The Squatter. This is a peach. It goes like this. I recall a gentleman of doubtful standing who was arrested for anal intercourse, an offense punishable by law. He insisted that the wife was his and that he had every right to do whatever he wished in the privacy of his bedroom. He refused to be examined by me. I informed him that the refusal to submit to a medical examination could be construed as a sign of guilt. He could not care less. The police sergeant who had accompanied him embarked on an explanation which, in summary, explained to him that the law prevented him access to the rear but allowed him free entry to the front. There was a vague comparison to the use of private land and illegal occupancy of state land. As a seasoned squatter on state land, he now understood the process. However, he still maintained his protests. He said that at the time of his marriage, no one had informed him that the rear building belonged to the government and that only the front belonged to him. Chapter 12 is entitled Of Tooth Bites, Dentures and Stings. I read, a grave misnomer in terms of bites is no doubt the much acclaimed but often decried love bite. Despite being labelled a bite, it is actually an oval bruise with blood collecting under the skin surface. It presents with a shade of blue and changes colour to green and yellow over the next week before reverting to the original skin texture. Even the Oxford Dictionary errs with its description of a red mark on the neck caused by biting during lovemaking. In the first place, it is not restricted to the neck. It also does not carry a cut mark centrally. As for love, the matter is highly debatable. Though undeniably, the recipient will carry these decorative marks for at least a week as a purple badge of a major love milestone. Ladies and gentlemen, this is not all. In this book, we are also treated to geography and history lessons. Bassin Blanc will no longer hold any secret for you. the reader will also learn that the good Dr. Charles Edward Brown Sequard was not a psychiatrist, as most would probably have thought. I was one of those. But a Mauritian physiologist and neurologist who gave his name to a spinal cord neurological syndrome. But what we are taught is not just dry stuff. The lessons are adequately pickled with the usual barb of the author, who takes offense to a wide variety of people and things. The descriptions of his outbursts are epic. No one is spared. The police, fellow colleagues, lawyers, magistrates, politicians, the powers that be generally. The man is, as you know him, frank, honest in his opinions, and fascinating in his descriptions of what he lived and experienced. I thought it would be good to give you a couple of tidbits in order to rejoice you in advance and go to the words of my good friend Satish on, let's say, magistrates to start with. I don't think there are many of them today. It goes thus. Most magistrates are basically quite decent human beings and show some kind of decorum in behavior and manner. The profession is, after all, one of gentlemen and of ladies, all references to public toilets duly disregarded. To be fair, some degree of paternalistic attitude is expected from the bench, and one's dispense is tolerated by most accused, witnesses, and court staff. About lawyers, this is very short, but how sweet to us. Every time I had to suffer the stupidity of lawyers in court, I would wish for the next cadaver to be one from the legal profession. And since we have a few politicians present, let me, ladies and gentlemen, this is a subparagraph entitled Politicians and Dead Bodies. And it goes thus. There is one major difference between a politician and a dead body. Basically, one has the power of speech, whilst the other one is silent. Otherwise, it is the same amorphous attitude with an absence of reaction to any stimulus. It is the same droopy attitude, a vague look, and a thick skin. Ladies and gentlemen, I'll stop here and obviously leave it to the members of the medical corps, many of you present, and the police, I've not seen many police officers present, to find out what's said about them. The potpourri of the dramatic and often grotesque situations which are rife in this book mixes the good, the bad, the ugly, and the extremely hilarious. I've found it, as I said before, a most enjoyable read. We must be extremely grateful to Satish's wife, Hema, whom we learn was at the source of it all, as she kept a faithful record of all these cases, which provided Satish with the raw material to produce this impressive and forceful argument for the opening statement of this book, and I quote, "There is no perfect murder." With these parting words, ladies and gentlemen, I commend you to this absolutely marvelous book. Thank you.
Gentlemen, first of all, I would like to thank everybody who's managed to come here tonight. The traffic has been heavy, and I know it's been an effort on your part to attend the launch of this book, which to me represents maybe not exactly a summary of my work, but my having a go at the system. I think Gavin put it rightly. Gavin told you initially, how did we become friends? If we became friends. He's been taking me to the cleaners for years, and he mentioned that I needed a psychiatric examination, which I fully agreed. But then, you see, he wouldn't tell you why. It was a case of somebody who killed somebody else. Obviously, she did not like her, chopped her into bits, and was planning to dispose of the body in La Vanille Crocodile Park, which is a good place to dispose of a body if you intend disposing of a body, because the crocodiles are fairly hungry and will consume the body. But then when I examined the lady in question, she told me that her saint, in Mauritius we obsessed with religion. We were going to fast for no reason, but we were obsessed with religion. And this lady told me this black dog came over to me, and I stabbed that dog. And I said, if the dog were white, ma'am, would you stab him? And she smiled. And that was the indication for me to decide that if she had a sense of smile, a sense of purpose, she would not be indicated for a psychiatric examination, especially in Brown-Séquard. But there's one story which I thought Gavin would mention, which I'd like to share with you, which does appear in the book. On one occasion, a gentleman came from France, where he had created a mouvement pour la libération de l'île Maurice. Can you imagine? We all need to be liberated, I know that. But he created the movement. So having created the movement, Interpol informed the police, and obviously the minute he landed at the airport, I had to examine him. Having examined him, he had committed no crime on the soil, so basically I threw him out and he went back to, I think, Con Masque. Then he started putting up posters which were of a defamatory nature against the Prime Minister of the day, and the police grabbed him and he was brought to my office, and I saw him this time, this fellow coming in. He could not look at me straight in the face. He had a huge file with him, and obviously during the course of his liberation of Mauritius, he had written to a lot of heads of state who had responded. John Major, the Prime Minister of Great Britain, answered back. Jacques Chirac, Mayor of Paris, answered back, which gives you an indication that the fellow who's mad, he's not only mad, there's others who are worse than him in positions of power. And they answered, and they said they would follow his future with increased interest. So the fellow came to me, and if you wanted somebody to liberate Mauritius, it was not him. He didn't have the looks, nor the personality, nor the charisma. Even a dog would not follow him out of any house. He'd be allowed. And finally, I called his wife to be able to get him admitted to Brown-Séquard. The wife came in. Obviously, she'd had a good service job done in France, all the right makeup, etc. And she told me, my husband loves me. So where's your problem? I said, my problem is he's out defaming the Prime Minister. And she said, well, if that makes him happy, what is your problem? So at the end of the day, I decided maybe to send him to Brown-Séquard, and I decided to put in a word with the psychiatrist. And I told the psychiatrist, this gentleman is mad. He wants to overthrow the Prime Minister. And the psychiatrist told me, I want to overthrow the Prime Minister. I said, he says all the brilliant ideas of this country are his. So she said, maybe. Who says it's not? And the next day, the gentleman went to Brown-Séquard and was released by the psychiatrist. He was a candidate for the elections. And the tragedy is he got 6 votes. And I spent the rest of my life wondering who the 5 others were. Maybe the mother-in-law, maybe the wife, maybe a sister somewhere. But again, we lack 3. But this is the tragedy of legal medicine. When I came back to Mauritius and I was hanging around, I went into union business. And many of you do not know I was the cause of the strike in the government hospitals in 1982, during which time I was prosecuted by the police alongside Dr. Rashid Bibijan. Both of us were prosecuted by the police, and we managed to get away from being locked up in 82 just by the strike being called off. And when I came home, my wife was pregnant at the time. After the issue was over, she told me one thing, and she always refuses to admit she said that. She told me, every idiot in this country is becoming a specialist. I mean, can't you make an effort? So I made the effort. I joined the police force within a week. And she went even crazier. And then she said, well, what are you going to do in the police? I said, train in forensic. So then I went into forensic, did 2 years training in Mauritius, then went to the UK, where I had some juicy murders. I reached Sheffield, about a month after they caught the Yorkshire Ripper. And it's been my great regret in Mauritius that we don't have serial killers. That would have made my day. That would really have made my day. What we have in Mauritius, thank God, crimes of passion. The wife having a little bit on the side, or the husband a little bit on the side, and somebody gets jealous. Instead of going to the lawyers and getting divorced, they kill each other. I mean, but the thing is, finally I came back as a specialist in legal medicine, and I was wondering how many cases would come my way, because all we had were road traffic accidents. I think Dr. Movaza, he's here, will admit that his bread and butter, and Dr. Prasad, they will both admit that the bread and butter are road traffic accidents. But then as I went along, I kept meeting friends who told me, when I had cases like, which do not appear in the book, Vanessa Lagesse, do not appear in the book. Other cases of great resonance do not appear in the book because they're not finished with the court. And it became so interesting to practice legal medicine. Except that if you have to kill your father-in-law, please do it during the day, not at night. Not when I have 2 whiskeys and I'm not quite sober to drive, and then you kill your father-in-law and I have to turn up and ask you why you did it. You see, you have to be a bit, and if you want to commit suicide, please leave a suicide note behind. It makes life so much easier than one has to rely on the free waves and the free radios to be able to know what happened. Ladies and gentlemen, I think Gavin Glover was quite fair to me. I never expect lawyers to be fair to me. I never expect lawyers to be fair. This is one of the great tragedies in my life. And I wish to inform you, because this is something that got stuck in my throat. One day I was in court, at the Supreme Court, deponing on some idiot who had killed somebody else. And I did not appear at the intermediate court, and the lady magistrate fined me 500 rupees. I went to see her. I said, I don't mind 500 rupees. This is the price of a funeral in my constituency. Anybody who dies in a constituency, 500 rupees. If you love the person, 5 or more hundred rupees for the ice table, for the aquarium. But she fined me 500 rupees. She recalled the fine. But it got stuck in my throat on that day, that whatever you do, whatever be your competence, nobody at the end of the day appreciates your work. And all that is left for you is to wish that someday they die and you manage to perform the autopsy. Thank you.